Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. Today I've got a MacBook Pro. This is an A2289 and we're going to change the display assembly on it. So I'm just going to have a look and see what condition the current one is in. Is this going to have any battery in it at all? Ah, there you go. So as you can see, classic case of failure here. We've got a crack that's formed from the bottom. So what has very likely occurred here is something was shut in the screen. Very common issue that I see coming into my shop is where someone has placed, they've got a cable that's been trailing across, paper clip, an earbud, something got shut when they closed the lid on it basically. And unfortunately with a MacBook, pretty much everything on here will just crack if you do that, and you don't get a second chance. The part that I'm using is this complete display assembly here. It is theoretically possible to do a glass and LCD only replacement on these. However, it's a very involved job, and if you're watching a how-to video on this, it is absolutely going to be beyond you, I believe. So I would recommend doing what I do here, which is to buy a complete display assembly. I find mine on eBay UK. Lots of reputable sellers on there that get these brand new ones in stock. So I've got one here that is for the A1989, 2251, 2289, 2159. And as you can see, it's got the whole shooting match, top case, screen, hinges, and the T-Con board, the whole thing. So whatever is wrong with your display assembly, this is going to fix this. And sometimes these are mega expensive, sometimes they're actually quite affordable. To put things in perspective, as of the recording of this video, I paid about £190 for this particular one. And for what you're actually getting and for the value of these laptops, that's actually not half bad. And in addition to that, it also means that any dings and knocks in the laptop lid itself are going to get fixed. So it does help restore some condition of the laptop as well. So with all of that in mind, let's roll the intro and we're going to start taking this thing apart and taking off the old display assembly. Let's get into it. So the main tools that I'm going to be using in this, I've got a P5 pentalobe screwdriver here. This is pentalobe 1.2 millimeters, which is used for the security screws on the bottom of the laptop. And then once we're inside, the two screwdrivers that we should need are a T5, that's Torx 5 screwdriver, and a T3, it's Torx 3. And I think that should be it. If we need any other different ones, I'll point them out at the time. So let's just zap out these screws here, and then we can take off the bottom cover. And to actually get the back cover off, there are very strong clips here and here, and there are hooks here hooking it on. So we need to get something underneath the panel to lift up at the front. So what I tend to do is I tend to grab any kind of prying tool and just very gently pry up just enough to get something under the edge there, like that. And now I can just slide this around to the front. And then pull up on the front. Come on. There we go. There's one side. There's the other side. And now I've got those two clips done. It's popped twice, one onto each side. Now I'm going to slide it in that direction. So what I do, I get my hand under one side, and I tend to try and pivot it down. I find that's the easiest way. God, this one doesn't want to go without a fight. There we go. Oof. Okay, right, so I just managed to twist it down like that to release one side, and then the other side will just come off. That one really was holding on tightly. That's actually one of the hardest ones I've had to do. However, it did come off. So just take care when you're doing that, because you want to make sure you're doing it in a nice controlled manner so you don't suddenly lob the laptop across the room, lob the panel across the room, or cut your hand open on the edges of the metal there. So, right, we've got our back cover off. Right, another screwdriver we're going to need here is the P2. So this is an even smaller pentalobe screwdriver. And this one we're going to need for these antenna screws here. Couldn't remember if this one was going to contain those or not. Right, so the next thing we want to do is we need to disconnect the battery to make sure that the laptop is fully powered down. And there's two reasons for this. Is A, these modern MacBooks, it's really hard to tell when they're on and off because they're kind of designed to just always be on. And the other reason as well is that the backlight power rail going through the display connector is what's called an always hot rail. And that means so long as the battery is connected, even if the laptop is powered down, fully shut down, there will always be battery voltage going to this connector. And it's really dangerous to disconnect display connectors while there's power there. Because if you get it at slightly the wrong angle, that power rail might just short to ground or to somewhere else and either blow a fuse or even worse, put power into a data line that goes directly into your CPU. So let's disconnect the battery. I'll lift up this cover here. Just carefully peel this back. And let's just zoom in a little bit. And to disconnect the battery, we first need to disconnect its data cable. So I'm just going to pull this back. And this little connector here, there's a locking bar on the end. I'm just going to put my fingernail under that and just flick that upright. So that's now pointing upwards. And now I can pull that out. And now we need to undo this screw, which is holding down the actual tabs of the battery power. So that's going to be our T5. And now I can just bend this upwards. Let's not be too rough with it because we're just bending a metal tab there. Right, so now our battery is disconnected. Now the laptop is actually powered down for realsies. So now we can get to work with actually disconnecting stuff. So we've now got to start undoing everything around this section here. So I'm first going to disconnect the display cable. So I'm going to grab my T3 and I'm going to undo this little cover plate that stops the display connector from being able to lift off. And this little bar here that just holds the display cable flat. And now I can just again use a fingernail just to pop that guy up. And we'll just bend that back so it's clear. That'll do. Now we're going to unscrew the T-con board, which is this circuit board here. So I'm going to get the T5 and take out these screws along here. So now this board is kind of floating free, so we'll just let that float free. And now we need to remove the Wi-Fi antenna bar along the back here. So first we're going to disconnect it. So I'm just going to lift up this plastic cover over the antenna connectors. Just pull that guy off. And we've got two antenna connectors here. And once again, just fingernail pop those up. And undo the screw that's holding them down. And now I've got to take out 6 of these tiny screws from each side. This is where our P2 screwdriver is going to come in. These are horrible, these screws, and I hate them with every fibre of my being. So be very careful not to be too rough on these screws, because if you so much as give them a hard look, the head shears off or you strip the thread. So, you know, that's fun. Just get the other side. And now we also need to just remove these plastic covers from the hinges on either side, because those are also obstructing this antenna bar. So once again, T3 screws on these. And now this bar is ready to come out. So It might need a little bit of persuasion with a pry bar, so I'm just going to gently... Oh, there we go. That's just popped out for me. Sometimes you've got to get a pry bar under there and just pry away and just give it a nudge in each direction for it to release. Use your discretion there. And I'm very carefully just feeding out the antennas over here. There we go. So there's our antenna bar. We need to reuse this, so be careful with it. Now we've just got to undo these screws for these two guys here. And the purpose of these guys is they have a sort of spring-loaded ribbon that just keeps these ribbons in the correct shape. It supports the display cables as they go around to the actual display assembly. And if you're thinking that this all seems extremely over-engineered, I agree. I think it's kind of dumb, but that's how it comes apart. So let's just take those off. Right, so that's all of the display cables now fully released and ready to go. So the only thing that's holding us on now is the actual hinges themselves. So let's back out a little bit. So now I'll open up the laptop as far as it can go, and I'm going to hang it off the back of my counter like this. So now the body of the laptop is laying flat on the counter and the screen is hanging off the back here. And then I can now work on the back. So these screws here, these are T8s, I think. So we now need to pull out a T8 screwdriver. Yeah, that's right. And I'm just going to take out 2 screws from each side. And the last 2 will go a little bit slower because that's the point where the screen is going to want to actually fall off. Right, and off come the last 2. I'm just supporting the screen a little bit with my legs. And now that guy should just unhook. There we go. And there's our old display assembly off. And now we've basically just got to do everything in reverse. So put that to one side. Let's break out our new one. I'm going to very, very carefully just unpeel this tape here. And move that out the way. So now the T-con board and the cables are free to move. So those are ready to go. And we'll open the hinges up to maximum. So I'm just going to stick a screwdriver in there and just open those guys up. And now I'm going to support these cables, just pull those up with my fingers, and then hang this guy on the laptop body. There we go. And we'll get two screws in to support it. I'm not going to tighten these screws, I'm just putting them in place so the screen doesn't fall off. Right, so I've put 2 screws in and I haven't tightened them down, I've just left them loose, and now I'm going to close the lid of the screen. So again, just make sure you haven't left any of the packaging that comes with it in the way. I would recommend not removing any peels or cellophane yet at this point. We do all of that at the last minute when we know that the screen works, because sometimes you get bad screens, it happens. So I'm going to very carefully close the laptop. And now that the laptop is closed, now I'm just going to use my fingers around the edges and just feel up and make sure that everything is nice and square. Make sure that the screen is on straight, because there's a fair bit of movement for adjustments, and if you just tighten it up without checking first, the screen will be slightly wonky. So that feels about right to me. So I'm going to tighten down these 2 screws. And again, I'm just keeping fingers on the corners just to check that it's not falling out of alignment as I tighten. No, that feels good. And now we'll put the rest of the screws in. Good, now that's done, we've just got to connect all of this up. So I'm going to start by putting these little spring boys back in place. So I'm just going to manually align those with my fingers and then stick some screws into those. So back onto the T3s. Good. Now we're going to put our Wi-Fi antenna back in. So I'm going to feed the antenna wires back through the little hole here. So thread that in. And now we'll get the bar in place. So in the center, the bar has a little springy bit that just clips into the actual base of the laptop. Let me see if I can get you guys a close-up of that. So you can see the silver bits there that are just sticking down at the bottom. So those just need to press into the base of the laptop. Let me just see if I can do that for you here. There we go. Those are basically in now. They tend not to go in with any kind of satisfying click. However, the antenna bar is not loose anymore. You can feel that it's being held in from that point. So that's in. So now I'm going to put in the 6 screws on each side. So we'll get these back in. As I mentioned when removing them, we need to be very careful because if you're at all rough with these screws, you'll either shear the head or shear the thread or both. But I wouldn't panic too much if you happen to butcher one of these screws, because by the time everything is in place, it's got other screws holding it in, it's not going to fall out, basically. Quite frankly, I'm not even sure why these screws exist. If I were designing this laptop and I wanted to negate the possibility of this antenna bar developing a rattle or a buzz or something like that, I'd have just extended it slightly so it would hook onto the endmost point of the hinge screws, since it all has to come out at the same time anyway. And I'll put in these hinge covers while I'm here as well. Right, now we're going to screw down the T-con board. And while I'm here, a lot of the time the replacement T-con board comes with these cover bits missing. If I compare it to the old screen, you'll notice we've got these cover bits over the top of these ones. Sometimes it comes with these and sometimes it doesn't. However, more often than not these days, they don't come with those attached. So I'm just going to take the ones from the original display and fit those. And these just provide a little bit of extra support for the main ribbons, and they make sure that those connectors there can't pop off. Which is not a fault that I've seen happen before, but you know, since we have them, we'll add on all of the parts we can. I'm just putting these screws in halfway just to make sure that the T-con board is sitting in a nice and relaxed position. We don't want to put this guy under stress. So I'm just giving that a little wiggle as I put in each screw, just so I know that it's not going in at a weird angle or anything like that. And now I'll just very gently press down on those ribbons and put those covers on. There we go. And finally now I've just got to connect up the display cable. And again, I'll put on the little cover plates for this guy as well. And let's not forget our Wi-Fi antennas. So these guys, you want to make sure it's nice and lined up, and then just give that a little click with the fingernail. And again, make sure you're perfectly lined up. You shouldn't need a lot of force these. If they're not lined up, you'll flatten the connector. They're kind of delicate, these, so just go with care. When it's right, it'll literally just go click, problem solved. And we'll just put that retaining screw in, and then we can put on the cover. All right, now we're going to connect up our battery again. So I'm going to try and do this in a decisive motion because I don't want to stutter the power in any way. So I've got that ready to go. Line up the screw, and we're just going to go on and screw it down. Theoretically, power should not start flowing until we reconnect this guy. However, if you have a third-party battery fitted, this guy might be always hot, even with the data wire disconnected. This data cable carries a serial connection, so the laptop can talk to the battery and check its charge level, status, and so on. But it also carries an extra wire that basically just says, don't make the battery live if this data connection isn't there. So the battery should be in an off state until this guy's connected. And once again, I'll just put the little cover across this one. Right, that's ready to go. Now, before I put the back cover on, I'm just going to make sure it works. So I'm just going to open the laptop up. And we might need to connect power to it. I think that's going to be the case here. So I'll plug in a Type-C power cable. And there's an Apple logo. So we'll wait for this to get to the login screen just so we can be certain that there's no weird funky colors or lines or something like that. Alright, this is booted up to the reset password prompt. So this is probably because the last couple of times this laptop has been turned on, there was no picture and then the laptop was just forcibly switched off again. And when you start up a MacBook without entering the password a couple of times, it just automatically assumes that you're having difficulty logging on and sends you to the reset password screen. We can get out of this just by waiting for it to examine volumes and then hitting restart, which I can do now. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to close the lid carefully again at this point, and we'll sort that out in just a moment. We've seen that the screen works, which means we can go ahead and close this up now. So let's find the back cover, and I'm just going to wipe the dust off the back of this before I put it back on. And so here are those little hooks that were holding us up at the beginning. So we need to make sure that these go back into this edge along where the Wi-Fi antennas are. So I'm going to line this guy up, place down one corner, just short like that. And I'm just going to move it in and just feel it out until those hooks are engaged. Right, there we go. That's the point where it's going to link up. So there's only about 2 millimeters visible there. And same on the other side. And now we'll just give that a shove. And we know that that's on because now the cover doesn't want to lift off anymore. And now we can just click this into place. So I'm just going to press very firmly here and here. And then there's some more clips around the middle here somewhere. Like that. And now we can put the screws back in. So back to the P5, yeah. And there were 3 types of screws in the bottom. There was a very long step, a medium step, and a short step. Let me just give you a close-up of what those look like. So there's our long boy. Whoops. So there's our long boy, the medium, and the short. So the long guys go in the back corners. The medium guys go in the front corners, and the short ones go in the middle. Now the last item of business is to do the peel. Now don't get excited and rip it off at top speed. Go slowly and carefully. So just take one corner, and what I do is I keep one hand just touching the surface of the screen while I peel. Because what I've seen happen when doing this is I've peeled these off before and the screen has just suddenly washed out, gone really high gamma. And I thought I'd ruined the screen in that moment. And I don't fully know what happened. I think maybe there was some static, just a little bit of static just to upset the screen. It did come back. After about 5 or 10 minutes, it faded back to normal colors and it was fine, but it frightened the life out of me. So what I tend to do is I just go slowly with one hand touching the surface of the screen just to make sure that there's no static buildup as I pull the peel off. So we don't need to go to glacial pace, just don't rush it is all I'm saying. And we just gently pull that off and just make sure there's no issues there. There we go. Right, that's it everyone, we're now done. So, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you found that useful and or informative and or entertaining. And thank you as always to all of my channel supporters, and I'll see you next time in the next video. Bye for now.